Good afternoon. It's Make It Fair. We are live. My name is Harmon Dash, along with our colleague Tracy Bender. And, we always like to shine a light on government-endorsed corruption, whether it be local here to the city of New Orleans, throughout our state of Louisiana, or across the nation wide. Today, we want to focus on a very important race headed to our runoff on December 5th. It is for the Orleans Parish District Attorney. We've got two candidates to discuss, and we wanted to give you as much information as possible as you head to the polls, either starting for early voting tomorrow, which runs from the 20th through the 28th, or if you're going to the polls in person on December 5th. So why is this an important race for New Orleans? Well, listen, prosecutors are the most influential actors in the criminal justice system. Outgoing District Attorney Leon Cannizzaro has kind of ruled with an iron fist. He's taken a win-at-all-costs, lock them all up attitude towards prosecution. And we're not so sure that that actually represents the makeup of Orleans Parish at all. Yet he seems to continue to do so. He's decided, Tracy, not to run for another term because it seems like the temperature of locally here and of the country is leaning more towards progressive policies. We're sort of after George Floyd in this turning point moment in terms of Black Lives Matter and how criminal justice is disseminated, not just here in New Orleans, but around the country.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing we're seeing it in all the progressive communities. So, you tend to find bigger cities, even in conservative states. New Orleans, for example, it's no secret that we are a democratic city. The vast majority of people here identify as blue or left-leaning. And granted, it ranges from light blue all the way to deep, deep, deep blue. But
still a shade of blue for the most part throughout the entire city. It begs the question, how does someone who rules not necessarily in the interest of the community, like Leon Cannizzaro, continue to have gotten elected to DA over the last however long he's been sitting in that chair, which has been quite some time? It's another example of money being considered over the will of the people, because while the residents of Orleans Parish are different shades of blue for the most part, a lot of money comes into this city to fund politicians. It's coming from more conservatives here.
Yeah, you froze there for a minute. I'm sorry, but your sentence made it, so you're good. But yeah, so We've heard a lot lately about the crime bill of 1984 and how, we got the 3 strikes rule, and that sort of started that whole law and order iron fist.
And that was passed bipartisanly, by the way, the 1994 crime bill. It certainly brought a lot. It certainly brought a lot of scrutiny on communities of color. And that 3 strikes mandatory life sentence rules for repeat offenders, I mean, it basically locked them up and threw away the key. And a lot of these...
Sadly, in many cases, it devastated communities of color because of over-policing. I'm sorry, I was around in the 90s. I went to a lot of parties. I never partook, but a lot of parties where the majority of folks there were yuppie white people, and there was always cocaine. But we didn't see cops showing up at those parties. But we saw them on every corner in Black communities. We saw, because of over-policing, we saw a lot of Black men end up in prison. The families were torn apart, and it devastated the communities because it took away all hope. What chance did you have? And with the George Floyd, I'm just going to hop back for 1 second. With the George Floyd shooting, there was a very popular thread going on here in New Orleans where somebody asked the question to Black people of the city, how old were you when police first pulled a gun on you? There were over 20,000 responses, and they ranged from 8 to 14.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's no question that we've seen a disparity in terms of enforcement and justice, or a lack of justice in terms of outcomes through the criminal justice system. So here we are. We have an opportunity to move forward here in New Orleans, because if we are going to take the George Floyd moment and Breonna Taylor and all of the various stories we've seen where enforcement has just has ended someone's life unjustly, if we are to fix this as a nation, and certainly here in our community, we look for prosecutors who will support criminal justice reform. It can be a powerful force for making long overdue changes to laws that would reduce mass incarceration and racial disparities. And a growing number of forward-thinking prosecutors are leading the way in altering this culture and carrying out new approaches. End of prosecuting minors for trespassing or shoplifting, drug possessions, misdemeanors, and an increased effort to decriminalize poverty and addiction and mental illness through some newly created diversionary programs, ending the cash bail system that disproportionately penalizes poor people who can't afford to make bail.
Yeah, and another big push, and you'll see it on both candidates' platforms, is to hold police more accountable, to create task forces to prosecute police when law enforcement officers, when in fact it's clear that there's been a misuse of their power, and that has been sadly one of the things that keeps police forces across the nation from wanting progressive DAs, because they don't want to be held accountable. The argument or they're saying they shouldn't be, because nobody understands the fear they live in all day long. However, the argument against that is that if they're not held accountable, it creates lawlessness.
Well, we won't see any changes to the things that we clearly see as a nation that needs to change in terms of enforcement, if we're not going to hold those who over-enforce and do so irresponsibly accountable. In fact, a lot of people that take the side of the police in these discussions sort of subscribe to a few bad apples. Well, if you want to root those bad apples out, we need to hold the bad apples accountable so that we don't have them be part of the police force. Maybe this just isn't the work for them if they can't enforce responsibly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, our outgoing DA, Leon Cannizzaro, he had nationwide celebrity.
Notoriety, maybe?
Yeah, notoriety. Sadly, for all the wrong reasons. And one of them is that not only did he rarely question cases that came to his desk, he in fact prosecuted over 90% of them. And we know that there are times when people are offered a plea bargain and they can't afford an attorney, so they'll take a plea bargain because it keeps them from having to serve jail time. You've got a DA now who has the conviction, but in fact, you have a lot of innocent people who just can't protect themselves from an overzealous system. And
and justice is not served when you intimidate someone into fleeing to a crime that they didn't necessarily commit.
And on that note, the 1994 crime bill, everyone now is looking back saying that all it did was it destroyed our justice system. We have a lot of convictions, but very little justice.
Right.
So, and Leon Cannizzaro is from that era. Harry Connick, New Orleans has a long history of some pretty abusive DAs. And
for those not familiar with New Orleans and our justice system, we're talking about Harry Connick Sr., who was right. who did bring Leon Cannizzaro up through the ranks, and Leon
not
Cannizzaro,
the jazz singer.
right? But
His father.
We're talking about his dad. But he was the mentor to Cannizzaro, who then continued in the job very much in that same spirit. And so, many argue that, he was prosecuting juveniles as adults and looking for felony convictions whenever possible, possibly even ignoring exonerating evidence just to get the win.
And that, unfortunately, has been proven multiple times that he, because cases have been overturned specifically because of that. And we're going to get into that in a minute, because that's one of the corruption charges that we're getting ready to discuss about one of the candidates. And I'm going to tell you the most egregious thing Cannizzaro did, from my perspective, is he jailed rape victims and served them with fake subpoenas because they were afraid to testify or didn't want to testify. Because we all know the history in this country of how rape victims are treated on the stand. It's like they're the guilty party. They caused it somehow. Right. So there are a lot of women who back off, once the trial comes up, because they don't want to sit through that. They've been victimized enough. And so Cannizzaro just piled on that by literally jailing them.
Well, given the current environment, Cannizzaro has decided not to run for another term. And that's why we have two candidates who are headed to this runoff on December 5th. Both, though, have some charges of corruption, and we want you to take your pick. We want to lay out the corruption that is labeled on both of these candidates and ask you which you think is the lesser of two evils. A lot of people hate that phrase, but when it comes down to your final two selections, there is no perfect person, and certainly there is no perfect candidate. And maybe we don't lead with pragmatism, but when it's down to your final two choices, there's got to be one you like more than the other. And
well, we talk a lot about that our system is completely broken. It's difficult to find a great candidate, one that checks all your boxes, as long as money is ruling our elections. And so,
and even if you find a candidate that checks all your boxes, likely the person next to you is going to say, well, they don't check this box or that box. It is very difficult to find the perfect candidate, even under good circumstances, and certainly under the circumstances we find ourselves now, where money is controlling our electoral process from top to bottom. So let's get into these two candidates. We've got Keva Landrum, who has drawn some national attention herself, not necessarily for good reasons. Critics are saying, they're pointing to this story reported by the New York Times, NOLA.com, the AP, that this election in particular for this DA race, in terms of Miss Landrum, comes down to the story of people like Robert Jones. Wouldn't you say?
Yes. As a matter of fact, let's just read exactly what the New York Times wrote. Following a 2-day sham trial, Mr. Jones was wrongfully convicted of robbery, kidnap, rape, and manslaughter he did not commit. The New Orleans district attorney, the literal textbook case of prosecutors who hide evidence, never disclosed that police apprehended another man who matched the attacker's description, owned the car used in the crimes, lived near the location, and who had the victim's stolen jewelry in his possession, as well as the gun used in the crimes. Every prosecutor, from Harry Connick to Eddie Jordan to Keva Landrum to Leon Cannizzaro, continued covering it up by hiding even more evidence and, worst case scenario, trying to intimidate Mr. Jones to give up challenging his conviction, which begs the question, how many times were they successful doing that? How many people were intimidated out of it? I've heard stories about friends getting arrested because they might help exonerate. As a matter of fact, you and I interviewed a young gentleman who has also, his case has been overturned and he's been exonerated. And that happened in his case, where he had friends who were arrested and then changed their stories because they wanted to cover up the fact that they'd gotten the wrong guy. But Mr. Jones was finally exonerated after 23 years. With all that evidence pointing to another guy, the man still spent 23 years in general. He now works for the the upside of the story is he now works for the Orleans Public Defenders, where 7 of this year's reform candidates have ties. He's suing the DA's office for deliberately hiding exculpatory evidence in dozens of known cases since the 1970s. Dozens. And those are the ones they could find. So,
so now Ms. Landrum actually had been acting DA here in New Orleans in 2007 when Eddie Jordan resigned. She only held the office for a year because she won a seat as a criminal court judge in 2008. But in that short time, she drew more national attention, mostly for coming down hard on marijuana possession, prosecuting repeat offenses as felonies, not misdemeanors, charges that could result in 5 to 20 years in prison. And before her term, the office routinely treated those cases as misdemeanors, which carry much lower penalties. The critics
and not just in New Orleans. That's not just in liberal New Orleans. That's statewide. Statewide, this was not happening.
Critics
she was tougher on crime than any other judge, any other prosecutor in our state.
And some might say she wanted to create the image of being tough on drugs and crime, but it was unfairly prosecuting, giving much harsher punishments to that didn't fit the infraction, and ruining lives by doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we all know the consequences in Louisiana of having a felony conviction. One of them losing your right to vote. We of course know it makes it a lot more difficult to get a job, and the critics say that she was racking up felony convictions to make it appear like the DA's office was tackling violent crime. Because New Orleans at the time was being declared the murder capital of the country.
Right, but marijuana possession is not a violent crime. There's no way you can shade that. Now, go ahead. Now, granted,
Keva did respond to this.
Okay.
And of course, we'll leave it up to, and we're going to talk about both candidates' responses to their corruption controversy. One thing that I'll say is that these are facts. These are not charges. These are things that have been proven, that she helped hide the evidence, and that she way over prosecuted nonviolent offenses. But her response was, I would disagree that I had a punitive record.
Well, so I mean,
she does not see that as punitive.
If you don't mind,
is frightening.
I mean, clearly, you and I sitting here are making the case that it was. But if you think, being really harsh on marijuana possession isn't punitive, then maybe she's the candidate for you. But that's her story, and she's sticking to it.
Absolutely. And you know what? I don't want to minimize anyone else's choice. I'm sorry. I never hide that I'm, I lean pretty far left. So to me, that's a lot. That's pretty freaking punitive. But
you live in Orleans Parish, correct?
Yeah, I do. So
this race is close to our hearts. We will admit that freely here.
Yeah.
But the other candidate.
But on the other hand, if someone does agree with that, and that's our point of having this discussion, is so that people understand that here's the corruption charges, or here's the times where even our nation has viewed her actions as corrupt. But if it fits in your wheelhouse and that's really kind of the prosecutor you want to see, now you're aware that she's your candidate.
Well, so on the other hand, there is another candidate here who's got some allegations of corruption to contend with as well. Jason Williams, charged with tax fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States, aiding and assisting in the preparation and presentation of false, fraudulent tax returns, failure to file IRS forms 8300 relating to cash received in trade or business, not claiming $10,000 in cash taken or trade. And he found 40 categories in which personal expenditures such as gym memberships or vitamins, student loan debt, they all managed to find their way onto Jason Williams' business expenses. And over a 4-year period adds up to what they're alleging is about $200,000 in unpaid taxes. Now, it began as a case against his tax preparer 2 years ago. They claim that when Williams had failed to show up for an interview regarding that original case, that's what made them suspicious. They looked deeper at that point. So, these are allegations. This is not a proven. He's not been proven guilty in court yet. But it makes people ask, how is he going to be for criminal justice reform when he's possibly a criminal himself? That is the question being asked right now.
Right. And, there are folks that say that tax fraud is there are a lot of folks that want to forgive tax fraud because they say that they don't know anyone who doesn't actually commit it. We just mostly don't get caught. And that actually brings some of the controversy around these charges because Mr. Williams has pointed out that the case started a couple of years ago, and it started the case against his tax preparer. Right. The investigation started a couple of years ago, shortly after he announced that he was going to run for DA against Leon Cannizzaro. And this was before George Floyd's death, and I think Leon Cannizzaro saw that there was no way he was going to get reelected under the current climate. So he has since backed out. But at the time, considering running for reelection. I'm sorry.
At the time, he was still considering running. The current environment hadn't taken a hold yet, and so it basically lays out the idea that it's possible that the investigation into Jason Williams was politically motivated, not necessarily about justice of catching a tax fraud. However, politically motivated or not, if Jason Williams is guilty, he still would have committed the crime. If he is guilty and possibly goes to jail, how would that affect his ability to be our district attorney, Tracy?
Absolutely, and that's the one of the other things they point to is also that out of the hundreds of clients that this tax preparer had, everyone's asking why there was a laser focus on Jason Williams. Again, if you did the crime, you did the crime. But and then there was also just to add a little bit more to the controversy. The judge recently slapped the hands of the lawyers prosecuting him because for witness intimidation. And so, there are a lot of things piling up. Now, the pro-Jason folks are saying that
what we're hearing in the community between the two.
Yes. So what we're hearing is that many are saying that he's proven with his record that he is a reform candidate. It's something he's been fighting for years. They come back to that he hasn't been convicted. We don't even know if he will be. If he is, we don't know what the charges are going to be. And they're saying that because of Keva's record that they view as pretty horrific, they would rather cross that bridge when they get to it because she's always been part of the problem. And so it would just be more of the same. Now, those that are in favor of Keva, the pro-Keva crowd are saying that she's very professional and she's actually evolved, at least verbally. She's expressed a change in stance on reform and for minor offenses, and that she'll follow progressive practices. Because of her previous judgeships and the charges currently levied against Jason, maybe we should give her a chance to prove that she'll do the right thing. Well, like you said, I'm going to tell you, I've seen on social media threads over and over again that she is incredibly professional. crazy smart. So there are people that are drawn to that. And
well, and Jason Williams has been accused of having some sort of rock star persona. You know, he came to New Orleans on a football scholarship at Tulane. So he's always, you know, a big college athlete. He's always had a little bit of that cult of personality, and maybe that's, you know, that plays into the way he presents himself now as a candidate. Some that can turn some people off. That can also attract some people. Both of them have different manners of presenting themselves that aren't really about the job so much. It's just about perception. And so great, she is professional. That's good to know. But unlike Jason, she has only verbally expressed that she wants to be a candidate for change. Jason Williams has actually shown that he has a record of fighting for some of these reforms in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I mean, he for years, as a matter of fact, I think he really started to gain some positive notoriety in his attacks against Cannizzaro and the way Cannizzaro was spending money. The city council voted to give him extra money to create diversion programs, and instead Cannizzaro used that money to give his attorneys raises. You know, that type of thing. So, and Jason just, you know, Mr. Williams vehemently attacked him over that. So,
well, let's go over both of the candidates' actual platforms. First,
and also let's talk about quickly that they both have some pretty hefty endorsements. But yeah, let's talk about the platforms first, and then we'll go to the endorsements. So
Jason Williams, he's been ahead of the curve on the recent push for DA reform, as we've been saying. He's advocated for those unfairly affected by Cannizzaro's disparate policies. His endorsements wide-ranging from the Allegiance for Good Government to many local progressive groups like Indivisible NOLA. He had what many call a rock star career as a defense attorney. Williams has vigorously pushed for reforms for his city council seat and was Cannizzaro's biggest critic, all that we just brought to light earlier. We can confidently say that Jason Williams has walked the walk and been advocating for these reforms for years, as well as working pro bono for groups like the Innocence Project. And you can see here on his website, runwithjason.com, you can delve into it a lot more, take a look for yourself, and you can see the actual work that Jason has done towards criminal justice reform and the kind of district attorney he's likely to be should we elect him on December 5th.
Absolutely, and it doesn't take long to see why he tends to be more popular with the progressive community. I know a bunch of folks are they're consistently bringing up that he is not afraid to have those difficult conversations, like, you know, creating a civil rights division to confront the sins of the past. He's not afraid to talk about that Black people have been held down by the vestiges of white supremacy in our system and institution. You know, he's not afraid to say those words that for many people who tend to lean further right, those are words that make them very, very, very angry.
Right.
So, but you can tell, I mean, again, immediately you can tell why he attracts a more progressive community. You can see that his policies and his platform is definitely leans more progressive.
And so, I mean, if you agree with those stances, he might be the candidate for you. Now, what about Keva's Landrum's platform? She claims she's the only candidate in the race for DA with the experience to deliver real reform while protecting public safety, having served as both district attorney and chief judge of criminal district court. She has the endorsements of The Advocate, NOLA.com, The Gambit, all owned by the self-proclaimed conservative John Georges, by the way. We sort of talked earlier about money from outside the city coming in. This might be, you know, he's here, he's throughout the state, but clearly he's got the money to possibly shade this race in a way that doesn't necessarily represent the actual residents of Orleans Parish. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And let's also note that Mayor Cantrell also endorsed her.
She did.
Who also works really well with the moneyed interests in the city. I think she's got one of the toughest jobs in the country because it's you've got to get the job done. You've got to have a fair hand, but you also still need to appeal to the folks that have the money in the city, or you won't get reelected. So, and there are people on the left who are saying that that's what motivated her endorsement. We don't know, though. That's not what she's saying. She just really does feel like what she's saying is that she feels like because of Keva's experience, having been DA in the past, she feels like she's a better fit. And of course, folks push back and say, but her experience as DA, that's a good thing.
Her record doesn't necessarily say that she's going to be a candidate for reform. She's just saying that. Right. And you can see here, we've taken you to her website, kevalandrum.com, where you can look more about her platform and where she stands on the issues. And that page you're at right now, I think there's a video if you scroll down. Am I correct, Tracy?
There is.
You want to point to this video?
And it concerned me because what we do is we talk about money. And at first, as I'm watching it, I'm thinking to myself, she's right. This is wrong. And she's bringing up that candidates are taking a lot of out-of-state money. So then, of course, because we love to follow the money here at Make It Fair, I went and looked up who she's received money from. And her biggest contributor to her campaign is Hard Rock Cafe. So that's problematic. But and I would have never brought that up, except she brought it up.
Yeah,
so
on the website, she says out-of-state money controlling our elections is a bad thing. Now, please, thank you for that check. Out-of-state entity.
Yeah, and we agree with her. We agree that out-of-state money is a bad thing.
Right.
But
she claims she has the record of proven results fighting to deliver justice for victims and their families. She says she'll be fair to all New Orleanians, and she's the only candidate who can heal the divisions in our communities. She'll be tough on violent crime and work for safe neighborhoods. Many critics say this is a well-known dog whistle, but she claims she'll expand on diversion programs and strive to end mass incarceration. We just don't have the actual evidence in her records to know that for sure.
And she, when you delve deeper into some of her plans, she has a lot of good programs that she is discussing now. How they're going to be managed and how much they're actually going to mean down the road, we don't know because she doesn't have a proven track record of, in fact, working on this side. But I will say this, that if you tend to lean, be a New Orleanian who leans more centrist, I can see her appealing to them because she is smart, she's hardworking, and she's not going to rock the boat too much.
All right, so there you have it. Two candidates, both with charges of corruption, some facts, some allegations. It's a tough choice for New Orleans, but we have a chance to see some real change or possibly something that isn't going to move the needle as much in terms of how criminal justice is laid out here in the city and for the parish of Orleans. Best practice for hiring managers, not about the resume or how convincing the candidate is. It's about the patterns. Patterns are the truth. And we've all learned from experience, it's not necessarily what they're saying, it's what they've done. And when people show you who they are, you maybe should believe them. So,
and so it just comes down to There appears to be corruption on both sides. So which one is more palatable to you?
Okay, well, so early voting again begins tomorrow, November 20th, runs through the 28th, and then the runoff election officially is held December 5th. So first and foremost, make sure you vote. It is important to vote every single time. Elections, politics are local, okay? It's great to come out and cast your vote for the national elections, for the statewide elections, but even when it comes down to your specific jurisdiction, laying down your vote will have an effect on your lives. So please make sure you vote.
And I want to say, you know, again, I know that we've kind of beat the dead horse that this is arguably the most important election there is in New Orleans, considering our city and how it's been devastated by mass incarceration. And this can really turn the tide. This can give these kids, these poor Black kids that have been most horrifically injured by this, it can give them hope again. It can create a community bond where we can see that they in fact were victims, and it's time for us to give them a chance towards correcting that. The only way that is going to happen is if not only we elect a great candidate who's saying all the right things, maybe even has the past history to prove that, but also, even more importantly, hold them accountable afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we hope we've made this decision easier for you. We will see you at the polls for Make It Fair. Tracy Bender, I'm Harmon Dash. We thank you for watching.